producers, what do they do? Are they actually working or just nodding at you? They take a long pause and say, let's talk it through. But seriously, producers, what do they do?
Hello and welcome to the Doctor Who show for this special episode I'm calling Ask Mr. Producer. I'm Dave and I'm delighted today to be joined by an Emmy-winning producer, that is friend of the podcast, Dylan Rees. Welcome, Dylan.
Hello, it's wonderful to be back here. Thanks for inviting me.
No, absolutely. When Rob did his interview with you about the book that you had coming out, which we have both read and both enjoyed, I said, look, I won't join Rob for that one because I think that two people interviewing one person is never a good format. But I also said, I have this concept I want to do with Dylan later on, so I'll save it for that. And that is this concept I want to discuss tonight. I don't know how this is going to go with the rest of the audience. I don't know who's going to be interested, but I am, and hopefully you are. So we'll see. And the conception of this is that I was thinking a little while ago that as a Doctor Who fan who's active in Doctor Who, and I suspect as anybody who's active enough to listen to a podcast would be, I know quite a bit about how they made classic Doctor Who. Between DWM and reference books and DVD documentaries and podcasts and convention interviews, I can talk with a reasonable amount of authority about how Doctor Who was made, what a script editor was, what a producer was. Hell, we even have reference books that can tell you how J&T was fiddling his expenses every day with receipts. Like, that's the detail we have. But I thought, as somebody who's an active Doctor Who fan, does podcast, does hot takes of all the new episodes, I actually don't know that much about how television is made today and what a lot of these terms mean now. So I thought, let's get somebody who's actually in the TV industry to talk a bit about all these differences that are come along. So Dylan, I'm hoping you can cast some light on the mystery that is 21st century television.
I hope I can too, and I think, I will try and relate it back to Doctor Who for everybody as well, because I also think this is quite an interesting time, especially when we get into sort of the funding of TV shows and stuff like that, and the state of the industry and the state of Doctor Who at the moment. I'm hoping I can shed some light on perhaps that we're looking at Doctor Who through the microscope and panicking about the future of the show, but actually it's representative of television, the state of television as a whole and streaming, but we'll get to that, I'm sure. No,
I think that's absolutely right. And again, what's interesting is when I look at classic Doctor Who, you get the sense that the way that Doctor Who was made in the 60s, 70s and 80s was very, very similar to how television was made, certainly in the BBC in those times. Like there was a house style and this is how it was done. And I don't even know if that's the case for Doctor Who now. Is Doctor Who an outlier or is it very, very standard? So that's the level of lack of depth that I have. So look, the starting point I have, and one that hopefully is a very easy question for you, is I know what a producer did in the 20th century. I have no idea what a producer actually does in the 21st century. I do know that on television now, a lot of people are called producer. In fact, I counted in the credits of Star Trek Picard on one episode, 34 people had the title or the word producer in their title. I also know that there's a thing called a showrunner. I don't actually know what that is. But Dylan, what is a producer into the 2020s?
If we take it back to 1980s Doctor Who, there was one producer, and in a very rare case, there was the exec producer, Barry Letts, who was sort of brought in just to give a helping hand. And though that sort of thing happens today. And everything was on that one producer. And I think what people realised is, A, that's too much work for everybody, for one person. And B, people have different skill sets. So there are different types of producers, and there are different titles producers. I don't want to be dismissive and say the bottom, but let's start with associate producer is something you see cast around quite a lot. That is usually somebody who's in-house at a production company, or maybe it's a staff writer or something who has made a big contribution to the development of and production of this series or this film or something like that. So while they don't have huge stakes in it, the company have felt, this is somebody that is on their way to becoming a producer. So it's usually a nominal title for somebody who's got another title in-house or in the writer's room or something like that. Then you have co-producers. So I co-produced a film recently in Prague, and that was a production company put it together. There were two producers on the project, but they weren't on set all the time. So they brought somebody in to just sort of oversee things on their behalf and oversee the production team that were from the Czech Republic. So I was that co-producer. In film, producer titles are they come with a little bit more weight. So even though I was as a co-producer doing a producer's job, I hadn't done the development period. So it's sort of going, you're up the chain, but you don't have creative ownership of the project to a certain extent.
Are you a decision maker in any way or just a manager?
You are a decision maker, but there will be referring up the ladder as well. As I said, I flip between a number of these things. The next thing is a line producer. This is what the majority of my credits are, and I've been moving into just producing for the last few years. Line producers are brought in. Usually they'll come in and do some work in the development stage. I do a lot of work in between projects. So if you look at my IMDb, say there's 15 line producer credits and 5 producer credits and production manager before that, blah, 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 blah. And you go, well, that's not a lot of credits. There's so many things that I could stake claim to that I'm not credited for, because I'll go in and do what's basically called a feasibility study early on, which is someone's developed a TV series or a film and they want to know, how do we make this? So I come in and I pull the script apart and I build them a schedule and a budget, and I might do research. If it's, we want to shoot in Europe, I might go out and visit these different countries in Europe and work with production teams over there to see who is the best fit for it. Sometimes I did a thing for Netflix Japan earlier in the year, and the director wanted to come over and do character research. It's like, somebody like this, where would they live, where would they work, and so it's sort of booking in those research trips and sort of helping them develop a better understanding of the place. But essentially it's, how much does this cost and how long will it take to shoot? And quite often the amount it will cost and the amount of time it will take to shoot is not at the budget level that the production company desires. So there's some work to be there, and then you might be working with the in-house producers, the exec producers, the writers, the directors to scale back the scripts a little bit.
That feels like something that would have been very in-house back in the day.
Yes.
And it's now a contracted out role.
I think it's probably the nearest thing that you could describe to JNT's role, except JNT was also doing all the other bits. That we'll come to in more detail. And then ultimately what will happen is there might be 6 months between that sort of research and development through to when it's shooting, so I might not be available, so somebody else will come and do it. But over this year I've done some research and development, some feasibility studies on a £60 million series that's based on a classic British film, a well-known comedian show for the BBC and a famous indie company, a bunch of indie films, a couple of things for like $20 million films for a big streamer. And some of those things got made, some of them didn't. Ultimately, I was busy doing something else when they went into production, so I didn't end up making those things, but that's just the nature of the business. So the IMDb may have 25 credits on it or whatever, but there's at least 6 or 7 just from this year that I could also sort of say I've got a hand in. And that really, more than anything, gives me an idea of the state of the industry, of what broadcasters are willing to pay for TV series and where the funding comes from and all those things.
Okay, that's interesting. So obviously a producer isn't what we think of being a producer, and as Doctor Who fans, we sort of have, certainly I know I have this sense in my mind that there's a line that, the same way that we talk about John Pertwee, Tom Baker, yada yada yada, Chris Eccleston, we talk about Graham Williams, John Nathan Turner, Russell T Davies, sort of all in one big lineage. But that's clearly not how it works. And I think comparing Russell T Davies or Stephen Moffat or Chibnall to JNT or Williams or Verity Lambert is a completely felonious comparison, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. The next thing we would get is a series producer, which is definitely a freelance position. This sort of exists in television, less so in film. It does on bigger films, but not in the sort of world that I operate in. And I've been the series producer on something for Channel 4, and that is an external producer who's brought in at sort of around the same time as the line producer. And this one is focused more on the creative. And so it's having script meetings, it's giving script notes, it's helping casting, it's, you know, it's all those things. And when you get to on set, a lot of the time it's about relationship management. That could be relationship management between departments, it could be relationship management between cast members and directors, because, you know, there's a lot of big creative energy and sometimes people don't get on or people have different things, and it's about being that mediator and just sort of guiding the ship and ensuring that, you know, you come in basically with everybody happy, completing the thing and on budget more than anything else. And that's obviously, you have a close relationship with the line producer to do that. So that's, I think, probably what you call the most stereotypical producer role that people, I think, would associate with being a producer.
When you're in this role and you have trouble on set, do you ever channel your inner Peter Moffat when Tom Baker's being difficult and just go, I know it's 2:00, but this isn't working, we're just going to go to the pub for the day?
I wish you could do that, but it tends not to happen so much these days. In fact, I think I would probably lose my job if I called the day early and said, yeah, we're all going to the pub. That only ever happened to me once on a production when I was in a more junior role, where the producer said, right, let's call it quits, we're all going to the pub. And I found out afterwards it's because he was in-house and he'd just been made redundant, and he was just like, well, yeah, you guys weren't going to get in trouble, so I thought I'd take you all to the pub. Anyway.
Classic.
Then you get both in-house producers and in-house executive producers. Now, these are the guys that develop a project from the start. So they will have hired probably the writer / showrunner. They'll have a hand in hiring the director, although so will the sort of series producer. These are the guys who, let's say it's a pre-existing book, and they've read this book and they've gone, oh, this is a really good idea for a TV show. And so they will outlay the money as a company, or sometimes as an independent company, they're outlaying the money themselves to option the story. And then they might use the same writer or a different writer to write the script. And they could be in development on 10 different shows, 10 different films for years and years and years. And some of them may happen and some of them may not. I've been attached to a bunch of things where I've done a couple of months' work and it's just not gone anywhere. I also have a little company where I've made a couple of films myself, and we've had plenty of projects that you try and get off the ground. You have meetings with financiers, with different companies, and it just doesn't happen. So it's their baby, essentially. They are, from a producer point of view, the creative lead. They are hand in hand with the writer every step of the way, trying to get this series to a place where it's good enough to be made, essentially. And there's a lot of outlay on companies, and I don't think people quite realise it. I can't speak 100% for Bad Wolf. I've never worked for Bad Wolf. But when they got the pitch for Doctor Who, when they were pitching for Doctor Who, I imagine they had to pay Russell to write a treatment, things like that, and present it to the BBC. That would be the normal thing. It may be a different situation there because everybody knew each other. They would have gone through several drafts of that. They would have put together a pitch deck. They would have, a presentation to go, this is where we see the series going. This is what it's going to be. And a bunch of other companies would have done that. And that would be outlaid at Bad Wolf's expense. And then if they got the series, great. They'd probably factor that money into their production budget. If they didn't, then that's a loss for whatever companies that don't get the pitch. And quite often in development, if you do get someone interested, like the BBC or Netflix or whoever, they'll shell out a little bit of money and go, okay, we'll pay you for one script. We'll pay you for another script. But I had a meeting for a show the other day and they were like, Channel 4 paid for the first script of this series because they wanted to see what it was like. We didn't think it would get going until episode 2, so the production company paid for episode 2, and then they got the green light.
So these are all TV shows that are being created in-house and then pitched to a broadcaster, whether that's a state broadcaster or a streaming broadcaster. Are there ever situations these days in the 2020s where somebody like the BBC would go, we want to make this show and we're going to do the impetus to go and find these people to make it happen? Or is that a dead thing?
It's a pretty much a dead thing. I mean, the BBC themselves have to put out, have to put all their shows out to tender to independent production companies now anyway. It's part of their charter. Things like the news and certain current affairs shows and things like that are still produced in-house. But essentially, either somebody comes to the BBC, and we'll use the BBC, but it could be Netflix, whoever, and goes, we've got this show, we've got these people attached, what do you think? Is it the sort of thing you might be interested in? Or the BBC have relationships with lots of indie production companies and they go, we're looking for something a bit like this. We're looking for something to fill this slot. This is what's going to be around it. And, the companies will turn around and go, well, we've got this. How about that? And again, they might have spent £250,000 developing the series and it might go nowhere. But then the next series that they've got goes somewhere. Then, that's the nature of running a business like that. You have to have the capital to invest in the first place to do the development in order to get the show made.
So I was thinking as I was prepping for this discussion about the first time I heard the term showrunner. And I think it's probably Aaron Sorkin and The West Wing.
Yeah.
Because I was certainly... I think I later became aware of Joss Whedon had a similar sort of role on Buffy. JMS... we knew was the creative controller of Babylon 5, but I don't remember ever being called the showrunner in the 90s. But I think it was Sorkin and The West Wing that first came about as this idea of this is a guy's program. And it's certainly always sold as that person is the god above all of this. And the impression is that they write the scripts, decide the storyline, they hire and fire, they're the face of the show. But as we discovered when Sorkin got fired, that's clearly not how it works. And the way you're describing it, the showrunner's hired by the producer. So is the sort of the popular perception of a showrunner perhaps a bit skewed because they're the ones that do the interviews and get to write for DWM?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of that. I mean, I've worked with a couple of showrunners and I've had positive and negative experiences. Ultimately, they are the creative lead. It's their baby, whether it's something they've come up with themselves, some original concept, or it's something like Doctor Who where you are in that role for X amount of time. How powerful they are depends on how powerful they are in the industry. To be truthful, like I've worked with someone who was show running for the first time and they were just there willing to learn and making mistakes and chipping in with everybody else. Once, you've been in the industry for 40 years and you've got a string of hits behind you, then you are more powerful. But ultimately, there's a world where those people get removed if the broadcaster, the streamer, the production company isn't happy with the way things are going. Obviously, it's very difficult. You can't just fire somebody because you don't like a script. It's got to be a process of like, this just isn't going the way we want it to. And it's also about what their contract says about how are you allowed to give them notes. Some people don't take notes very well. Some people, it's written into their contracts that nobody can rewrite their scripts. So I can't speak for what it's like with Russell and Stephen and Chris Chibnall. But what I can say is that from what I've heard, those showrunners want different involvement in the show. Chris Chibnall seems very much focused on his scripts and his story and his casting and actually the day-to-day production, less so. And it felt a bit like that with Stephen Moffat, whereas you hear Russell talk and he's talking about being in budget meetings and cutting things and, being involved in every level of production. So I think Russell is probably the most hands-on, certainly in his first run, perhaps slightly less in his second run, I don't know, but he feels like the person who's got his claws into all of it. But yeah, ultimately they're a creative lead and you've got to be pretty sure that you've got the right person in the role in order to make it work.
Yeah, because I guess ultimately, as you're explaining it, somebody's money is at stake.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
If this show doesn't get made or this show fails, the person who's put the millions of dollars or pounds up is actually the one that is going to be in the hole, not the person writing the script.
And quite often there's a third-party company brought in called a completion bond. And I know Doctor Who had one of these on the Disney deal. And they're a company who are there, who cast a view over the whole of production. They keep an eye on the budget, the scripts, the schedules. They're having meetings with heads of department and stuff like that to see how they're getting on. And they're looking for any weak links, any issues that might occur. And they've got a huge amount of production experience. And ultimately, if they think there's something wrong, they are the sort of people that can turn around to the financiers and go, we need to get rid of X writer, X showrunner, X director. And I've seen it happen. It does happen because that, ultimately they're going to spend all your money and you're not going to have a full series.
They do sound a bit like the old Soviet political officers that would go on the submarines and just make sure that everybody was, singing from the same hymn sheet.
And it's important to note that while, when we're talking about the most recent era of Doctor Who, and I know they had one because I know the company who did it, There's certainly no reports or no indication that whatever's gone wrong at Disney, it's that they spent too much money or something like that. And things do overspend, and there's natural overspend, and you usually have a contingency as well of sort of money to use. But making television hemorrhages money.
So one of the things that does seem to be very similar between old school and new school television is the role of the director. Notwithstanding, I get that now it is a much more complicated shoot, and we have directors of photography and cameramen are more than just what they were, in the 1960s. I get that, but the idea that the director is in charge of what the camera ultimately shoots and how they shoot it seems to be fairly similar. And correct me if I'm wrong there, but the thing that does seem to be very different is we look back at a series like Blake Seven, Doctor Who, even something like Rumpole of the Bailey, and you can go, oh, that was directed by that director, and this one's been directed by that director. Whereas you look at shows now, and they can have a different director for every episode, but there's clearly a house style that goes across the whole thing. Is my perception there broadly correct?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it depends, doesn't it? I think Doctor Who is probably an outlier in that because you jump to different places and tell different types of stories. Like, I think you see that a lot in the Stephen Moffat era, for instance, where directors do bring a bit of their own flair, whereas the Chris Chibnall era and the most recent Ross T Davies era definitely had more of a house style, which would have been dictated by the showrunners and the producers involved. They've gone, this is how we want our series to look cohesively, whereas Stephen Moffat, you do go week to week. We use the mini movie thing a lot, but it is a mini movie where the director's been given a bit more of a sort of free hand. So yeah, there is that. It will be dictated from above. So television's very much a writer's medium. Film is very much a director's medium, which is why I think you always see directors going, I want to get into film, because they're the director is God, and that's where they can really put their mark creatively. So yeah.
You've mentioned budget a lot, and this is obviously a really important aspect of making anything. I reckon television now looks more expensive than it did in the 20th century. Now, is it that making television is just cheaper, and therefore you can do a lot more with a lot less money? Or is it that at some point around about the year 2000, someone just decided, we're not going to make cheap television anymore. Television's going to be an expensive medium, and it's going to cost a lot more than ever used to. What is it actually like in the industry?
Obviously, you allow for inflation and things like that, but even since COVID, since Flux, the cost of making television around the world has gone up 40%. That's through things just inflation, but also the cost of just like the cost of everything's gone up, from labour to materials, things like that. But yeah, I think it's referred to in the industry now as high-end television, and everything's high-end television. It didn't used to be, like we think of a sitcom, a studio band, but even say 10, 15 years ago, a sitcom was made with a very small crew of, say, 25 people that would be a bit run and gun. I'm thinking of Shameless, which I used to love. The production values on that aren't very high. The acting and the writing are very high, of a very high standard. But and that's what sold it. Now, it tends to be that everything has a big crew. Most things will be 2-camera shoots. They'll be all very sort of blocked out and planned in a stylistic way. We have a lot more grips. We have a lot more lighting team that really make these things feel bigger, more expansive, more expensive.
Is there more of a sense now, and you talked about that initial budgeting process of you want to make this show, this is how much it's going to cost, and then you work out if you can do it within the budget. Is the threshold to go, we have enough money to make this higher now? Whereas I look back at TV shows that were made, particularly in the 80s and the 70s, and my God, I'll show you some examples of Australian and New Zealand television that was made in the 70s and the 80s for like you think British stuff is cheap. You look at some of these. Is the willingness to just go, okay, at this point it's now too cheap? Like, is that a bigger thing?
I mean, I think we're at an interesting turning point within the industry at the moment, because audiences are so fractured and nobody's getting the ratings or like they used to, because everybody's watching so many different things. So actually people are looking to do things cheaper. And I do think perhaps we're at a turning point. I'm not saying we're going to go back to multi-camera, shoot it all in television centre, but I do think we are getting to a point where perhaps there is a distinction again between television and high-end television, and perhaps we might need to let movies do the movie thing and let television do its television thing. I still think it'll be a higher standard. Also, actually, what happened around, I don't know, 2010 or something like that, Netflix rolled out across the whole world. And they set up production bases everywhere that you went. So I went out to Turkey 5 years ago to do, some research and development out there, and I was working with a company, and they were like, if you watched Turkish television 5 years ago, you would think it's the most amateurish thing in the world. And now they're doing car chases and slick camera moves and explosions and things like that. Because Netflix went into every territory and invested in basically upskilling the workforce there so that they could make content for Turkish television, for Japanese television, for, in Eastern Europe, everywhere, so that they could make programs in the language of the people of that country. And then, as you see now, we see a lot more foreign language stuff with subtitles or dubbed on Netflix, because they're rolling out the best of it throughout the world, and they've suddenly got this huge catalogue of shows that you've never seen. But it upskilled all the workers and made it a truly global industry.
Yeah, that reminds me of going back to the 70s, where the legend was always that the Tomorrow People had a much smaller budget than Doctor Who, but the truth, as I understand, is actually the Tomorrow People had a pretty decent budget compared to Doctor Who, but they had no in-house knowledge. So there wasn't a great big effects warehouse that could go, we'll go and pull that out of the warehouse, or we need to do this effect, I know how to do that cheaply. They were inventing the wheel as they went, and that was just really expensive. And what it seems that you're saying is that Netflix has sort of just invented all these wheels, and everyone's like, now we know what we're doing.
Yeah, and as a result, like, the reason I was shooting in Prague in the summer is because part of it was to do with the scenery. Prague wasn't really bombed in the war, so this was a historical drama, and we needed castles and things like that, and all their castles are still intact. But also, it's a lot cheaper to film out there than it is in the UK, and so we got more bang for our buck.
So let's keep going on budget, because I'm really interested in this. And we've had some conversations offline over the last few months about this. I think I still come to it with this perception that, the BBC has a budget to make this many hours of drama every year, and it gets allocated here, and there's a budget, and it all sort of gets going down there. But we're not in that era anymore, are we? There's money's got to come from somewhere. Where does the money come from a series like Doctor Who?
So, I mean, there are sort of two avenues, and I think it's important to say the BBC still does have a budget for drama. It just doesn't stretch as far as it used to because the licence fee's been frozen. As I said, the cost of everything's gone up 40%. Audiences are down, and so they've got to spend that money more sparingly. So where there was a point where they might fund an entire drama, which was never the case for modern Doctor Who, now they're going, so I did a budget for something earlier in the year, 6-part comedy series, but sort of high-end comedy, well-known writer, well-known cast. I think it was 3 million an episode, and the BBC were going to give 1 million per episode. And then the rest, they needed to find a streamer partner or do pre-sales around the world. So the easiest thing is to find a streamer who's going to fund the other 2 million of said comedy series. The other way is that you go to every individual country or territory and go, okay, who's going to broadcast it in Australia? How many viewers do you think it's going to get? What's that worth to you? And they go, it's, I don't know, 500 grand. And then they go to Canada, and then they go to America, and all across Europe and everywhere. And that is how Doctor Who was funded before Disney came along. I can't speak on the exact structure of the Disney deals. I don't know whether the BBC put in any money or whether Disney paid for the whole thing. But either way, it feels like the finance came from one or two sources, being the BBC and Disney.
So presumably then, and this is something that Rob and I have speculated about on the Doctor Who show main episodes, if they want to make more Doctor Who and they can't find another streamer, do they have to go back to companies like the ABC and say, hey, you know how we kind of dumped you about 3 years ago? Well, would you like to get back together?
Yes, actually, that's basically it, yeah. If the BBC go, we're going to do another series of Doctor Who and we're going to try and do it on the old model, you've got to do, like, I know we all go, well, they did it in the Jodie Whittaker era and it looked amazing, you know, but as I said, things have gone up 40%. I imagine the ABC and BBC America and all these other companies that they used to go to, if they want to get back into bed with them, because I don't know how those relationships ended, I've got less money too. And so you're suddenly faced with a thing of, well, we can make a series of Doctor Who, but it's got to be a lot cheaper. I mean, maybe we'll get onto what the future of Doctor Who looks like in the current television landscape later, but it's not something that's as easily done as people think it is. Just like partnering with another streamer isn't as easily done as people think it is when you consider they've just had what can only be thought of whatever you think of the era. I think the fact that the deal didn't continue to another streaming partner is going to put the streaming partner on the front foot in the negotiations and the BBC on the back foot.
Yeah, I've certainly heard a lot of conversations with Kevin Smith when he's been trying to get some TV shows up. Yeah. And he's talked about how 15 years ago you could basically walk into any streamer with any idea and they're like, yes, we need content. Here's money. We're just going to throw money at you. And then after about 5 years ago, and that probably is around about COVID, suddenly he'll go to 5-6 different streamers and they'll all say, look, we don't dislike your program. We like this idea, but we haven't got the money to justify making it. And that threshold does seem to be a lot higher now.
Well, the streamer bubble has burst to a certain extent. They're not going to stop making programs, but most of them have got all the subscribers they're going to get. So they've got to deal with paying back the money they borrowed in order to create all this content and get people in. First of all, they've got to deal with hiked up program making costs, and they've got to turn a profit. I know it's a dirty word, but ultimately, if they don't make a profit, they're not making any more programs. In fact, they're disappearing. So they're spending less like the terrestrial channels are, and that is just the nature of the beast, unfortunately. Yeah,
and it's something that we perhaps don't figure in our thoughts as much as fans of television, is that the nature of these companies matters as well, because if you're Disney Plus, well, okay, you may not make a profit every year from your television arm, but you've got theme parks. And if you're Amazon, you might not make a profit any year from your Amazon television, but you're selling all sorts of crap all over the world, so you can kind of ride that out. Whereas Netflix, as far as I'm aware, it's just Netflix.
Yeah, more exactly. Apple and Amazon reportedly are in the industry at a loss because they just want to be in the industry because they think it's important. I mean, didn't Apple report like a loss of $500 million on their streaming service last year or something like that?
Something like that, yeah.
I also think it's important to note that actually streaming is a bit more of a niche platform than we think it is. And I know that sounds weird. So say Disney Plus has got something like 160 million subscribers worldwide. Now everybody goes, oh, that's loads. And you're right, it is loads. But also comparatively, something like The Walking Dead 10, 12 years ago was getting 18, 19 million viewers just on American TV. Advertising revenue was, streaming in because so many people were watching, and then they were selling it to different TV stations all around the world, and indeed different streamers, and it was a big show. Now the highest rated show on Disney Plus, and report again, they don't release their numbers, but you could sort of, when they go X amount of millions of minutes, you can work it out, is 16 million. Not a small number, but when you consider that 16 million people across the entire world, all of a sudden you go, oh, so we're putting more money into making things, less people are watching. There's not really advertising revenue, although we're starting to see that more on streamers and things like that. You suddenly inflated the cost, but devalued the product, so it's worth less. So I think that's something that the industry's dealing with at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. When they do leak the figures, it's because they've been really, really good. They want to get a bit of a positive story about that. I saw that Boots was a bit of a surprise success for Netflix in the last month or two, and they released that this is one of our best shows for this month. We've got 6 million viewers, and you sort of go, well, if that was on the BBC, you'd go, that's pretty impressive, but that's one country. Yeah. You're saying worldwide you've got 6 million. I'm glad the show did well, but you're right, that's not a blowaway audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's down to there is so much choice. There's also so much other things for people to do. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of talk at the moment of dual screening, so they make programs slower because people are scrolling. There's also, this is a dirty word, but that I've heard banded around a little bit, vertical dramas, where there's a couple of companies making 60-minute dramas that they're going to release in 2-minute chunks on TikTok and Instagram aimed at younger people. And it's like, okay, but then there's always these things, and some of them happen, some of them don't. We were all obsessed with web series 15 years ago that were tiny little episodes, and now most series are web series because you get them on the internet. So people try different things, they adapt, some of them stick, they evolve, some of them disappear, and you never see them again.
No, very, very true. I want to move in front of the camera just for a moment. Who casts actors and actresses in television these days?
So you will have a casting director attached to a project, and they will have all the good relationships with all the decent agents and things like that. And it will be between the execs on the project, so the in-house producers, in-house executive producers. If there's a lot of money at stake, or if it's a big name, then the people funding it will have a say in it. The director will have a say in it. The showrunner will have a say in it. A staff writer probably wouldn't. And the producer will have a say in it. And they will, sometimes they'll just approach one or two people because they're like, we want Daniel Craig in this role. And so you go to Daniel Craig first, and you don't offer to 5 other people at the same time. Or you go out to the agents and go, this is the description, we're thinking of people like this. And they send a bunch of tapes. Sometimes they'll send a bunch of names if it's a big name. If it's a smaller part, they'll send a bunch of self-tapes. And, it's something you discuss. You all jump on a Zoom and talk through the options and go, how about this person? How about that person? No, I didn't like that. I don't think they've got the character. And you go from there. But more than anything, it's about who's available at the time. It's also important to flag that this is especially true in film, but it is true in television. Never underestimate the star power these days, and it's why you'll see a lot of actors listed as executive producers or producers on projects. It's because they're so famous that them being attached to the project is what got it greenlit in the first place.
Yeah, I find it really interesting that we can watch Doctor Who, Blake Seven, All Creatures Great and Small, and we see the same actors turning up every time. And you watch a behind the sofa feature on a Blu-ray these days, and all the actors sitting on that sofa know everybody who's on that TV screen because there's clearly a relatively small pool of in-work actors and they all sort of know each other. You sort of think that now that we're in a global industry with so many producers and so many companies and so many streamers, that there would be a much more diverse range of actors, and you would almost never go, I've seen that person before. But in fact, what we do see is that the same actor turns up in everything, which just seems to affirm that idea that people are looking for a recognisable cast, even though the net is presumably a lot wider.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the supporting roles where you see more variety. But,
Sure.
Stephen Graham's a very hot name at the moment, and you'll see him as an executive producer on lots of things. He's also got his own production company, and he's a very talented and ambitious man, and everybody says he's lovely. But he's hot property, and having him involved is enough, in theory, to get your show greenlit. I'm sure there are things that he's been involved with that haven't been, but you're further on your way with somebody like him than you are somebody who's had 25 bit part roles in a bunch of Netflix series.
Is it true that the number of Instagram followers you have can absolutely influence your bankability?
I don't think it is. I mean, I could be wrong here, but I don't think it actually translates to viewers. Certainly, it's not something I've heard mentioned in any sort of serious tones. It's something you might see on a pitch document sometimes when they're going, oh, and we've got this person attached, but that's when they're slightly lesser known, I mean, if we took something like a YA drama that has a young cast and they've cast somebody who's got a big Instagram following, they might mention it in passing, but nobody's going to commission it based just on that. Yeah,
right. You mentioned before the whole issue of availability. Again, when I think back to all the interviews that I've read and the interviews that I've seen with cast on stage at conventions, and there's always this sense from the old days of, well, I was cast in this program or this movie, and therefore for the next 4, 5, 6 months, they owned me and I couldn't leave the village. And it was very much a Locke sort of thing. And this idea of, even just strolling down to do the 5 Doctors for an afternoon was a really big deal.
Yeah.
Whereas now there seems to be a lot more flexibility. Is that because of tech? Is it because you've got dedicated schedulers? Or is that just a perception and I'm completely wrong?
No, I mean, so you will be on first call to a certain production as an actor, and you have an insurance stop date as well, which is usually 7 days after you're scheduled to finish, where if you want to do anything else, you have to get permission from me, essentially, or the producers. But what generally happens is you do your schedule and you find, I don't know, it's a 60-day schedule, and that actor is in 60% of the scene, so they will have days off, and they might have, they've got to go and, do a reshoot for something else, or they're doing a cameo in this, or, they need to do some ADR, additional dialogue recording. And so you will say, well, these are the days off. And if it doesn't work, you do spend a lot of time speaking to the first assistant director and producers on other shows, because the first assistant director is the person that ultimately manages the schedule. Because you're always trying to help people out, because you never know when you might need to borrow one of their actors or something on a different production. So productions will work together to try and help each other out and go, okay, can we free up X actor for 2 days in week 4 of the schedule? And if it's possible, it's possible. And sometimes you have to let people down. But on a show like Doctor Who, where the 2 or 3 leads are in every scene, it's probably less likely. In the Chris Chibnall era, where there was 4 leads who, while they were shooting Yaz and Dan one day, Jodie had the day off, it's more likely that, you'll be able to accommodate that in the schedule.
Yeah, and presumably the nature of the show matters a lot as well. I heard an interview with one of the cast of Stranger Things once where they said often they would see in the schedule they've got 3 days off, and they'd say to the director or the producer, hey, I've got 3 days off here, would it be safe for me to go home for a 3-day weekend? And they'll say, look, I know in theory you've got 3 days off, but the nature of the program we're making with Stranger Things is that things often don't work, or, weather doesn't work, so we can't guarantee it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you have to be pretty sure that you're almost going, okay, if the weather's crap or if this goes wrong the day before, what would we put in instead? And will it feature that actor? So, that's something you just have to deal with.
Something else that I think has changed phenomenally in television in my lifetime is child actors. Now, when I was growing up, child actors were either very, very clearly old, like adults, like in their 20s, and reasonable, or they were young and crap. And I was just thinking of a couple of examples. Like in The Horror of Fang Rock, the character of Vince is clearly meant to be about 16. He's a brand new apprentice. The actor John Abbott who played him was 32 when he filmed that, and because it's Britain in the 70s, he looks 40. And, you go to stuff like To Serve Them All My Days, where, all the sixth formers are played by Nicholas Lyndhurst, and they're very, very good, but he's obviously 25. Yeah. You look at the outers from Full Circle. The guy who played Tylos was 24. The guy who played Vash looks like he's already worried about his alimony. Like, or very rarely you have a young actor, and then they're not usually that good. Whereas nowadays I watch television and you watch a show, and I'll use Heartstopper because I know you're involved in that, where you've got actual teenagers playing teenagers who look like teenagers, and they're very good. And it's not universal, but child actors now seem to be younger and significantly better than they used to be. What's changed?
I think people decide to be actors or want to give acting a go from a younger age, and there are certainly more sort of drama classes, drama schools, weekend classes that allow for them just to practice their craft basically and decide whether it's for them. And you have really experienced people teaching them these things, whereas it felt a bit like back in the day, it was a bit like, oh, my son wants to be an actor, let's see whether they can do it. And the first time they do it is when a camera's pointed at them. I don't know that for certain, but that's certainly what it feels like.
Well, we know that was the case with Matthew Waterhouse.
Well, yeah, exactly. It was left a lot more to chance. And also, there's child working hours are very strictly regulated, but there is a system in place that goes, if you want a child on your set, you apply for this child license, you have to get permission from their school, you're providing tutors and chaperones and all these other things to ensure that you're not interfering with their education in any way, and that ultimately the child is safe. And the only times I've ever really lost my shit on set has been because it's to do with child working hours and, you know, directors pushing things and things like that, because, you know, you cannot interfere with children's lives like that. So there's a much more of a support system, and there's a lot more third parties, and the child licensing people will come down to your set and they will check everything's okay, and if it's not, they will remove that child from your production, and then, you know, you're not in a great place. So I think it's about the training, it's about the system that's in place. I've just done a feasibility study, some research and development on a film that's going to shoot next year, and it's got a heavy child cast, and it's very specifically scheduled to shoot for 6 weeks over the school holidays, because otherwise they haven't got a chance in hell of doing it. Something like Heartstopper, some of the kids are a bit older, some of the kids are a bit younger, but because it's an ensemble show, you can go, X character has 2 days off where they can go and do all their tuition and carry on with their studies and things like that, while Y character is on screen shooting. And so, you know, that's why that was feasible. But when you're dealing with a bunch of, I think every character in that film is on this film that next year is under 12, you just have to make allowances or shoot in the summer holiday.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Before we do get to the future of television and Doctor Who particularly, I've got two things that I want to put to you that I hear regularly from old actors and actresses that were in Doctor Who and nostalgic about their day and how everything was better. The first is one, and I remember Sophie Aldred had a really long conversation with me about this at Sirens of Audio dinner I went to, where there were a couple of aspiring actors on the table, and we got into a conversation. A lot of the cast that we hear interviewed in Doctor Who docos and the like talk about the old system of repertory theatre, where actors could go along and there was lots of little roles where they could learn their craft before they got little roles in television, and there was a pipeline to get up there, and that doesn't exist anymore, and therefore it's very hard to get into acting now. I am sceptical about that because, as we said, there's so much television being made now. Surely even a brand new bad actor can get a role somewhere. What do you think of that nostalgia versus reality?
I think the system certainly changed, and repertory theatre certainly isn't what it was. There are still lots of local theatre performances. Again, that's not really my world, but you know, it is a thing. There's also the short film scene, which is somewhere where a lot of crew and a lot of cast learn their craft, and it is a lot of the time it is working for free, for no money. They're passion projects or they're very low funded, but they are things that I certainly learnt a lot on them, and I've worked with crew and cast who, when I was doing short films, have gone on to have amazing big careers. There's an actor that I would say is A-list British television. I don't know whether he translates across the UK, but I did a short film with him about 12 years ago, shooting in a basement in Brixton, and he was brilliant, but ultimately he was probably getting paid about 100 quid for doing it, and it's just the nature of his career. So those opportunities present themselves in different ways. Is it harder to crack? Possibly. You know, ultimately you need to get your face in front of an agent who likes you, and then is an agent that's good enough to get you work as well. It's a different route. I can't comment on whether it's harder, but it's just a different route. But there are still ways into the industry. It's not a closed door.
No, that's interesting. The other piece of nostalgia that you always hear Doctor Who ex-cast talk about, and they will actually go out of their way to bring this up, I find, in conversations, whether it's on DVDs or in person, and that is the concept of rehearsals. And there's always this idea that back in our day, we would rehearse solidly for 5 days, then we'd record, and we'd work out all the nuances, and we'd adjust the script, and we'd work out the dynamics, and work with the director, and they don't do any of that these days. Now, I found it hard to believe that nobody rehearses anything on television. That seems to me to be improbable. What's the actual reality of how rehearsal works these days?
So on every production that I join, the director will always go, I'm going to need at least 3 or 4 weeks rehearsal beforehand. And due to the nature of the production, the availability of the actors, all the other things the director's got to be over, it ends up being about a week before. Now that'll be a week to do the entire series if it's one director. If it's 2 directors, they may not get as much rehearsal. They might get a day or 2. But that rehearsal does happen. they're not quite blocking out scenes, but also you'll have stunt rehearsals and things like that in that time if stunts are involved, intimacy rehearsals as well with an intimacy coordinator. And then what happens on the day is you rehearse and block on set, essentially. So you go in, block the scene, rehearse the scene, once with the director and maybe the writer and the DOP, and then another time with all the crew watching so they can see what's going to happen, and they go, we need to put a light up there, we need to, we need the camera to move across the floor here like that, so everybody knows what the scene is. So it is blocked and rehearsed, but it's done scene by scene. You shoot the scene and then you move on, and that's because television's regarded as single camera. It's really two cameras now. Most productions will have two cameras, at least 50%, if not all the time. But it's very different to the multicam setup you'd have in studios. And that second camera is just to save you time. With two cameras, you're not getting twice the amount of coverage. You're getting all your coverage on one camera and maybe 50% of just some extra bits that you don't have to worry about. It's done for time reasons, essentially. So I can't say minute for minute whether it's the same amount of rehearsal time. It's just structured very differently. And I can understand the luxury of people wanting that full week per episode beforehand, but then they used to shoot the episodes in an evening or in a day or in 2 days or whatever. So it's like now you might shoot a half an hour TV series in a half an hour episode in 7 days, 8 days, something like that. So I imagine if you spliced it up, you'd probably go hour for hour. It's probably about the same.
Yeah, and I think that it's also one of those things that, say you compare it to professional footballers. There are professional footballers that will do the training they're mandated to do, and then the professional footballers that go and do a whole lot of extra training because that's their focus and their ambition. And presumably there are actors as well who do the minimum they have to do, and actors who go, I'm going to spend a lot of personal time and do extra rehearsals and have as many conversations with the directors as I can, and they're the ones that perhaps give the better performances. Yeah,
absolutely. And there are Zoom calls and phone calls and late night, let's meet in book a room in the, a conference room in the hotel and just run through this scene for an hour because people want to, because they don't feel they've quite got it yet. And it's the nature of the beast. But I think everybody still gets their time to get it right. I think it's just down to how you learn your lines, which can be a big thing of if you're someone that needs to rehearse with other people to learn your lines, then you've got to find somebody, at home, your partner, whoever, to run those lines with you, to learn them. If you're somebody that picks them up relatively quickly by yourself, then you're fine. And I think perhaps the struggle is sometimes they're not learning the lines in situ, which is how they used to do it.
No, that's fair enough. So before we finish up, we've intimated a few times that we have some thoughts on the future of television generally and Doctor Who specifically and how it's going to get made. Open question, Dylan. What are your thoughts?
So, as I said at the start of our chat, I do think Doctor Who is representative of what's going on a lot in television at the moment, in that streamers have less money, broadcasters have less money, and we're seeing more and more. It's 2 or 3 years between series of anything, and I think it's nothing unusual for something like Doctor Who to be in this situation. I think so. There are two ways forward. There is the way I see it as the BBC route, which we discussed earlier, of making a much smaller series, and I think you're probably looking at one story for 6 episodes, and you might just crank that out yearly, and it would have to be a much smaller scale.
And that would be overseas funded, presumably.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing is if they get another streaming partner. I think what people undervalue at the moment is the back catalogue. The back catalogue is hours and hours of content that is worth something to any streamer. And actually, once you've got that, you perhaps don't need a series every year. And just in terms of their commissioning, it doesn't really work like that anyway. What you want to do is get people in to keep coming back to watching that back catalogue. So you could get away with doing a series every few years, or a couple of specials every few years, or one special a year, or 2 specials a year, or something like that. I think Doctor Who as a continuing series, of a yearly series, is probably dead when it comes to streamers. I think the nearest way you could get that to work is what they did with Disney, is go, we're going to record these 3 seasons, one of them which was a spin-off, and you hope it's such a huge success that after season 1 they commissioned season 3, and you've got 2 other seasons of your main show and your spin-off in the bank. But I can't see anybody taking that risk after, we've just seen, for whatever reason, Disney did not want to continue with another series. So I don't think Doctor Who as a regular series is going to happen on a streamer anytime soon. And that is what was the gap between Wednesday series 1 and 2? 2 years, because they see how the series is done. It's not necessarily overnights anymore or plus 30s. It's like, how long does it perform? You mentioned Kevin Smith earlier. His Masters of the Universe, what was it, 6 months after the first series had aired? Yeah. Netflix suddenly decided, okay, this has reached a point where we feel it's successful enough to commission another series. At which point you've got to write the scripts, you've got to animate the thing or film the thing or whatever. You've got to go through your post-production process, which takes longer and longer in television these days. And so, of course it's going to be 2 or 3 years between series. Whether this is the right format for Doctor Who or other TV shows remains to be seen, but I cannot see it being a yearly occurrence, which it hasn't really been for a long time anyway, apart from the last 2 years.
Yeah, and the point you make about linking it back to the older content is an interesting one, because I know that I've personally speculated that one of the perhaps ways that the Doctor can go in the future is a proper hard reboot and just go, right, what are we making this show for in 2026? Who's it for? What can we jettison? What do we do again? How would you do it if it's a brand new show? But if it's so different from the back catalogue, it's not going to hook people into the back catalogue.
Mm. You're also at a point where the show is 20 years old or 62 years old. So there isn't like a jumping on point necessarily for it's not that, you just start with Eccleston, because that's still 15 seasons of the show. That I think everybody thought, including BBC and Disney, that perhaps the specials or indeed Ncuti Gatwa's first season would be that, but it's quite continuity heavy. I don't think it's necessarily impenetrable continuity, but it is going, you do have to do a little bit of so that relates back to something that, okay, that's interesting, I mean, it's right there in the finale what Omega is within the story, but there's so much more to Omega that I can understand why people would be going, so is this a character? Is this important? Should I be? Yeah. And then all of a sudden you're watching Arc of Infinity or something like that. So I think it's difficult for a show like Doctor Who to know exactly where it stands with so much history. And I'd be more keen on a hard reboot and from day one. But as you say, if it's too different, what do you do?
Yeah, and we're also seen to be in an era where television is going through a bit of a phase as to what it wants to do. You go back 5-10 years and CW comic book shows were everywhere with 26 episode seasons, multiple spin-offs, etc. YA franchises were being started up everywhere. Every streamer wanted 3 or 4 YA franchises.
Yeah.
The CW shows are pretty much all gone. A lot of the YA franchises didn't get second seasons. So, and now we seem to be doing very different type of shows. So I guess just television just changes what it's about, as does the film industry.
Yeah, I think limited series seem to be where it's at the moment, and I think that's fair enough. But it's just the era of a continuing series seems to be gone for the moment. That's not to say it won't come back, and I think the Arrowverse or the CW verse or whatever they called it was a really good example of that. It's like that was reasonably high end television, but they were churning them out, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way. They got a format that worked, but it was made very quickly and reasonably cheaply compared to a Batman film or something like that. But with the costs of television going up so much, actually a formula like that just doesn't quite work anymore, and with ratings going down. So I mean, we talked a little bit off mic about The Flash. As far as I know, everybody loved The Flash from start to finish. It started with sort of getting 4 or 5 million viewers at its peak. By the end, it was getting 500,000 viewers per episode over the last couple of seasons.
Yeah, I was in that 4.5 million that was obsessed by it for season 1 or 2, and by the end, I just wasn't watching.
Yeah, but nobody was screaming and shouting, "Oh, it's too woke," or "Oh, it's it's gone to shit." It was basically just the changing nature of television is less people were watching, so the advertising money was worth less, which meant that ultimately they had less investment in the show, and that is a nature of things. Like if we look at Doctor Who's ratings, it's in the UK there's about 4 million people that seem to really want to watch Doctor Who and have done since the end of the Capaldi era, which is all right for a TV show that's been going 20 years, and in most people's eyes it has been going 20, not 62. Is it all right for a big reboot with Disney money that they were hoping were going to reinvigorate the franchise? I think everybody's probably a little bit disappointed internally that it wasn't getting the same viewing figures as those Tennant specials. Whether that's the lead, whether that's the creative, whether it's just franchise fatigue, Doctor Who fatigue, I'm not the person that's going to say that. I have my own thoughts on the era. Other people have their thoughts. But for whatever reason, that seems to be the core audience for Doctor Who that's not really going to go anywhere. So you have to figure out how to make a show that caters to that audience that they enjoy, but also is bankable, that is feasible in terms of the money that's available right now.
Yeah, and habits have clearly changed as well. I mean, when we were growing up, television shows had 26 episodes a season, and then it went down. 20 years ago, everything was 13 episodes a season, which made sense because, 13 fours are 52 and you can syndicate it, all the rest of it. Then it became 10. Now 8 seems to be the standard. And I've been guilty of it myself. Occasionally I think, I'm going to watch this new series, and I check out how many episodes it is, and I go, 10 episodes? That's a slog. I thought we did 8 these days. What about 6? Yeah. So you can see that just idea of, 13 episode seasons just barely exists.
Yeah, and it's a shame. And I think you would have to almost... I think the quality visually would suffer, not necessarily story-wise. And I don't think the industry's ready to make that compromise just yet. I think we're seeing it a little bit in comedies now in the UK. I can't speak for the rest of the world. I've noticed not every comedy's trying to be high-end drama anymore, and there's been some cheaper looking, very good, but cheaper looking comedy dramas, and I wonder whether that's a thing of the BBC or Channel 4 or whoever trying to make slightly cheaper productions and see whether they can get them out there. And that will, I know it started to slip into drama on things like Channel 4 and stuff like that, because I've been involved in some of them where they're like, we're making these at a very low cost point to see whether people bite, and sometimes they do and sometimes they don't.
Yeah, with the occasional exception with something like The Crown, where the fact that it's the most expensive TV series ever made is a deliberate selling point, and they've taken a gamble on a big budget 13 episode, but that if that doesn't land, then you're in a lot of trouble.
It felt like during COVID and just before COVID, when the streamers were at their height, there was so many the most expensive TV shows of all time, like the Mandalorian, Lord of the Rings, all these massive shows, and you've noticed there is a lot less of them now. They still do. Harry Potter is going to be the most expensive thing of all time, I'm sure.
Yep.
But people are looking for smaller budget shows to make, and where that leaves Doctor Who remains to be seen. It is something that I think could be done slightly cheaper, probably not as cheap as people think. And so, because there's less money, I think those big shows, we're going to see less and less of them. Having said that, I had a meeting with a big company the other day who were like, we've got X amount of shows filming over the next 18 months, and it was a big number, and all of them have a budget between 60 million and 250 million. So there's at least one company out there that still thinks there's life in those high-end shows. But who was it that one of the Star Wars showrunners sort of said, Disney Plus is kind of dead, there just isn't the money to make those shows that we were making a few years ago, and that's the way it is.
No, you're right. I think we're starting to see already the consolidation of all of those streaming apps where, again, 10 years ago everybody wanted their own app, and everybody wanted you to pay $5, $10, $15 a month for their app, and at some point people have gone, well, I can afford 2. Yeah. And if you're not one of those 2, you're not getting money. And suddenly we're seeing mergers and takeouts and buyouts and all the rest of it. I think HBO Max is probably the latest one that's going to be swallowed up, for example.
I think it's becoming a bit more like a cable package. I think the Amazon Prime model is really smart, because Amazon Prime give you X amount of free stuff, and a lot of it's tailored to your interests and things like that. Then you've also got the opportunity to buy things that aren't free on the app, and you go, it's only $2.99, sure, I'll spend $2.99 on that. But then also you can buy other streaming services, the smaller ones, through them, and you can opt in and opt out. Like, I've just got BFI Player through the Prime app for probably the 4th time, because it doesn't have a huge amount of stuff on there. I will go through that, watch a bunch of indie films for the next few months, and when I feel like I've seen them all, I'll get rid of it. And then I'll probably come back in a year's time and subscribe for another 2 months when they've got 15 other films added that I really want to see. So I think that's possibly a bit more of the future, the consolidation, upscaling and downscaling your cable packages or your streamers.
No, I think that's right, which is a very good way of summing up what we've been talking about today, which is that television is very, very different. Never mind 1963, it's different from 1989, it's different from 2000. We are in a very, very different world. Frankly, it's different from 2005. I mean, the X era is a bygone age now.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, when they were making Doctor Who in 2005, they had, you know, it was Chaos in Cardiff, which everybody's very keen on saying, because nobody had made a show like that in Britain for years and years and years. I think it's also important to flag that whenever we hear about all these behind-the-scenes dramas and Chaos in Cardiff, it's always like that on everything. There's always late scripts and things not working and rewrites, and actors have had to pull out, and directors, you know, it hasn't worked out with a particular director, and that day's rushes look crap. That is the same across every TV show and every film.
And let me tell you, Dylan, every industry.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I've worked in so many industries and it's all the same. But because we put Doctor Who on a pedestal, we kind of expect it to be perfect. But it was never perfect. When we hear about what was going on back in the day between Tom Baker and Louise Jameson, or the dinosaurs not working properly on Invasion of the Dinosaurs, or, you know, the sprinklers coming on in Lime Grove Studio.
Yeah, they can book a trip to Paris, budgeted within an inch of their life, and forget that there's a public holiday one of the days.
Exactly, and that stuff still happens.
Well, look, thank you, Dylan. I definitely feel a lot more educated about modern television than I was an hour ago. If our listeners want to find you, where should they look for you?
I'm on Twitter at Dylan Does Who. I'm on Bluesky at Too Hot for TV. I do the podcast, the Doctor Who podcast, Doctor Who Too Hot for TV, which looks at anything but Doctor Who, the television series. Yeah, I'm just about. If people have got other questions or anything like that they want to fire my way, I will try and answer them. I'm not the oracle of television knowledge. I can only give you my experiences and my view on the industry, and every prediction I've made could prove to be wrong. But so I'm just talking from my sphere.
No, absolutely. Look, at the end of the day, you work in the industry and you know a lot more than I do. I could talk with great authority about getting a bill through the Senate in Australia, but I don't think that's going to be particularly interesting. So look, once again, thank you for joining us. You're always welcome on the Doctor Who Show, and I'm sure we'll chat again soon. But until then, I've been Dave.
I've been Dylan.
And we'll chat again soon. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Producers, what do they do? Are they actually working or just nodding at you? They take a long pause and say, let's talk it through. But seriously, producers, what do they do? Dave's got questions for Dylan we've all thought before, about the kinds of producers there's apparently 44. Kids on set, Doctor Who, how TV's not what it was before. Big budgets to streaming and less cash than before. It's how shows get made and the notes from above. Why the thing you loved didn't test with the moms. Dave says, so Dylan, who's steering this thing? Dylan says the showrunners, the budget, and the deadlines they bring. It's how shows get made.